I think a lot of people, especially like maybe the crypto community or Bitcoin skeptics in general, are seeing the Bitcoin treasury company phenomenon and the proliferation of all these companies. And they think that something is going to go wrong here in a really big way. And like, to be very clear, like things can go wrong. Like these are
Hmm.
leveraged Bitcoin equities, many of them. However, it's like if you actually look at what these companies are doing, there was another funny tweet kind of related to all of this where it was like, people say the Bitcoin treasury companies are getting too leveraged, but like all of them are literally, many of them are currently selling equity and then buying Bitcoin, which is like the opposite of leveraging up.
Yeah.
If you sell equity and buy Bitcoin, you're deleveraging your balance sheet. Whereas like if you sell preferred equity or you sell convertible debt, then that would be leveraging up your balance sheet. But if you actually look at a lot of these companies, they're not that leveraged at all. It's like strategy is maybe like as 10% or 20, less than 20% of their Bitcoin net asset value is leverage. Like a lot of their balance sheet is just pure equity. It's comparing it to like real estate where it's very common to buy a house with 10 or 20% down or less. Like that's going 5x long real estate. Bitcoin treasury companies are basically putting 80% down or more and then borrowing the final 20%. And that's that's a fairly common Bitcoin treasury company or a leveraged
Yeah.
Bitcoin treasury company. And so Bitcoin treasury companies are like going 1.2x long Bitcoin rather than going 5x long real estate. It's like the real estate market and a lot of other markets are far more leveraged than the Bitcoin market. And the Bitcoin market is fairly underleveraged. Like these companies
Hmm.
so far have been executing in a fairly conservative manner. Now, of course, if Bitcoin falls 80, 90%, then yeah, a lot of these companies could be in trouble, especially if it doesn't come back up. But the way that they've structured their debt, where it's again the long duration debt with fairly low interest rate, then they should like strategy did ride out the 2022 bear market. Strategy stock, as Pierre kind of pointed out in this tweet, was very volatile. It fell more than Bitcoin did in the 2022 bear market. I think that's what he was saying when like the equity values will be more volatile than Bitcoin itself because these are leveraged Bitcoin equities. But that doesn't mean that, Bitcoin won't be volatile. And that doesn't mean that these companies are just going to disappear and go bankrupt. And so I think it's just like an interesting dynamic because the outside of the world sees Bitcoin plus leverage and they think the world's going to end, like this is crazy. But then with inside the Bitcoin community and the Bitcoin treasury phenomenon, it's like, yes, they are introducing a tiny, like relatively tiny amount of leverage compared to virtually every other industry. And yes, they are buying more Bitcoin with that, but they're not doing it in like an overly aggressive way, at least none that I've seen quite yet. Maybe some might in the future, but so far it seems like everyone's doing it in a pretty conservative manner. And again, like the debt is very long duration, so a lot of the companies don't have much to worry about anytime soon. And as long as Bitcoin continues to be good long-term savings technology, many of these companies probably won't experience any major issues. But it's just kind of a funny phenomenon because like there's a lot, it's like almost intuitive for the outside world to think that something is going to go wrong with this. And so far, if you actually look into the details, it's one of the least leveraged markets in the entire world right now. Yes, I think if Bitcoin falls 50%, treasury companies will fall more than 50%. So the leveraged treasury companies for sure. But that's there's no guarantee that Bitcoin will fall 50%. And if so, it's like it's still over a long enough time horizon. If Bitcoin keeps going up, you can still live through the drawdowns as many of us Bitcoiners
Hmm.
have in the past. As long as you have that low time preference and long time horizon, it could be something that will be good for Bitcoin itself and Bitcoin treasury companies.
What are your thoughts on just Saylor and strategy, what they're doing as well with their all their offerings? I mean, they seemingly like every day they're coming out with a new offering. It almost sounds like they're inventing something and they're tapping into something that legacy TradFi like forgot about. Like, oh yeah, we did have that in our arsenal. We weren't using it because it didn't make sense in the legacy world or whatever it is. But like, what are you weekly almost, they're like coming out with something like, well, here, we're offering this now. I would love for you to just unpack this a little bit and just your thoughts on, kind of where they've been and maybe their evolution, just for a minute, but also what they're doing right now and what you see going forward and how it's shaping what you guys are doing similar.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this probably plays into part of the confusion from traditional finance and also like the hardcore Bitcoiners, because they see these, crazy, interesting, confusing, advanced preferred equity offerings. They don't get it, obviously. And they're like, what is going on here? This doesn't seem right. This is over financial engineering. And again, it's like I pointed out, there's ways in which this does fail. It's like if Bitcoin falls 90% and stays there for like 5 years straight, these, that would create some serious problems for a lot of these companies. And like, that's the risk that you're taking with strategy or any of these leveraged Bitcoin equities. And so with that being said, I think a way to explain what strategy is doing with their preferred equity is Saylor thinks of it as, okay, Bitcoin is just this thing that's growing at roughly 30% per year for the foreseeable future. That's his view. And so he can create an assortment of financial products that are fixed income products. They pay a fixed amount of dollars in the future, something like STRF, which might pay like a 7 or 8% annual dividend on the stock. He issues those, effectively borrowing dollars at a 7% rate, and then buys Bitcoin with it that's growing at 30%. And then that spread between the 7% and the 30% is captured by MSTR. And that's kind of like the leverage Bitcoin position that these Bitcoin treasury companies are doing. And so it kind of creates two interesting, unique products for investors that hasn't existed before because no one created it really, right? And so it's, again, you have these leveraged Bitcoin equities like MSTR, which are borrowing money and buying Bitcoin, but then they issue these other securities that are kind of like Bitcoin, but with training wheels. Like it's still powered by Bitcoin underneath, except the returns are going to be less because you're opting into like a fixed income product rather than Bitcoin itself. But since the returns are going to be less, you're going to be a lot less volatile. And so like if you are an older person or you're like absolutely terrified of Bitcoin's volatility, or you think Bitcoin's going to just go flat for a long time in a volatile manner, then these fixed income products could be really appealing to you. And so it's really just creating different flavors of Bitcoin is another way they framed it for these different types of investors that are out there that, want a higher dividend rate on their fixed income or want a higher fixed income yield, but don't want to take more risk. It's like Michael Saylor was like, okay, well, we have these different assortment of, financial securities out there for you. And you can kind of pick whichever one that you want, depending on your volatility tolerance and your risk preference. And so I think that that's exactly what he's doing. And he's obviously done it pretty well. Like I think the STRC IPO that is just happened or is in the process of happening right now was like the largest IPO this year, 2025. It's like $2.5 billion. So clearly there's a lot of market demand for the securities that he's creating. And I think Similar Scientific, other Bitcoin treasury companies are likely going to, follow in Saylor's footsteps. In our proxy statement for this year, we added the ability, or we're requesting the ability to authorize a blank check preferred stock for Similar Scientific. And so in a way, if that gets passed by the shareholders, then that will authorize Similar Scientific to do something perhaps similar to what Strategy has done. And it seems like other Bitcoin treasury companies, whether that will be Metaplanet or others, if I had to guess, might be following in similar footsteps and copying this strategy. Because again, it's like you have this segment of the market that wants to leverage Bitcoin position because it's a pretty attractive position if you think Bitcoin's going to go up. And then you have this more conservative segment of the market that's like, okay, I just wanted a high fixed yield or fixed dividend on my investments. I don't want to experience the volatility. I don't really care how it works. Just give me the money every month or every quarter. It's basically a win-win scenario, and it's all built on top of Bitcoin, which is simply a better form of money that's in the process of being monetized. So I can see how a lot of people are confused by it. And I think that that's honestly like a positive sign for the future. Like I think of Bitcoin over the last 16 years has been one of the most hated contrarian trades of all time. Like so few people still get it and own a significant portion of it in their portfolio. Yet, it's a $2 trillion asset and, perhaps could be a 20 or $200 trillion asset. And it's just like right now, the contrarian trade within the Bitcoin trade is the Bitcoin Treasury company trade, which is also like one of the most hated trades in the entire world. Which to me, it's like if you're trying to allocate capital and outperform the market, you need to find opportunities that the outside world thinks are absolutely insane and they hate it.
True.
And that's how you're going to generate outsized returns in the future. And to me, it's like Bitcoin and Bitcoin Treasury companies are just like one of the most contrarian trades of all time.
The next unbelievable educational video here is going to blow your mind. Check that out here. However, if you want to take action on what you're learning, go check out our Bitcoin only sponsors here below. Meanwhile, it's the first Bitcoin denominated life insurance company absolutely flipping the game on its head. Then you have Crowd Health. Instead of the garbage healthcare fiat system that we use, get your funding of bills through a network of Bitcoiners, like-minded people, or foundation, the only hardware wallets made in the USA, open source, privacy, sovereignty. Go check that out below.